It's your boy, Remoy George Phillip, the first.
And I'm Samantha and Zessie.
This is Masculinity.
The show that investigates the performance of masculinity in the world today, and you know we spell it with a hard K.
So Samantha.
Yes, Remoy?
We have a writer with us today, Kirstin Cronn-Mills. Welcome, Kirstin.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Well, Samantha, don't you have some, ongoing joke you like to poke me about, push, prod, bully me about? No?
I don't know. What are you talking about? I don't recall. Whatever do you mean?
Oh, sure, right. You know, those times often where you like to scoff at, I don't know, like my bookish side, the fact that I like to read. Defend yourself. I dare you defend yourself here.
Well, I mean, reading a 700-page book twice, and I think you might even have said back-to-back, is no joke, and that's all I'm saying. But that's probably the time you gain back when you're off social media, so. And I wouldn't know.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. It wasn't back-to-back, but yes, that's what I do when I'm not on social media.
Which is never. But Kirstin, have you ever read a 700-page novel back-to-back?
I read a 700-page novel in one day.
Whoa!
What?
Sorry.
Yeah, more than 700, actually.
Which book was this?
That was Harry Potter 7. That's
what I was going to...
Back before I knew that JKR was a transphobe. But yeah, the day that book came out, I sat down and read the whole thing front to back.
Respect on many levels. Yeah. Well, luckily for you, all of us really, Kirstin, you're also an educator, right?
I am.
You're probably used to being on the other side of these, but today I have a pop quiz for you. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Kirstin, what are we talking about on the show today?
Sports and women.
Well said.
And masculinity.
Perfect. Wow. All three. Check, check, check. A+. We'll see how Kirstin really did. That's coming up after this break.
Curious about next-gen men? We're a small part of a much larger movement to undefine masculinity for a brighter future. Our mission is clear: empower the next generation to use their curiosity, empathy, and courage to build a more equitable world. Join the Next Gen Men community as we learn and unlearn together. We're here to support boys and men to break free from limiting stereotypes. We're not just an organization, we're a catalyst for reimagining masculinity and fostering inclusivity. We're here to help open up possibilities for what men and boys can be. Explore the world of Next Gen Men at nextgenmen.ca and join the community to make a difference. Next Gen Men, shaping tomorrow's leaders one step at a time. Join us and help undefine masculinity and empower the next generation of men to lead with empathy and courage.
Welcome back. Me and Samantha are here today with Kirstin Cronn-Mills. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, Kirstin, you're a writer, among other things. I know you've written young adult fiction with, Samantha, you're like a huge YA fan, I presume, right?
Well, actually, not anymore, but I have been known to love an R.L. Stine back in the day. Now I'm more into essays. I'm old.
Well, it's because of all these books that I'm leading today's show.
Yeah, we've talked about this offline, but Kirstin, you wrote a couple of books about sports, right?
I did. I've written a couple nonfiction books for middle school and high school libraries.
Oh, nice.
Well, okay. So this is interesting because there's this intersection with children, but actually I'm wondering for you two specifically, did you play sports as kids?
I didn't, because I grew up in the country, and I grew up in rural Nebraska. And so I went to what we called a country school, and we had 35 kids in our total school. Those were schools that were built for kids of farmers. So we didn't have sports, and I got to go to town school when I was 12. And then we had some middle grade sports and some high school sports, but I didn't play very much. I played middle grade basketball, a little bit of high school volleyball, enough to get my nose broken when somebody went to serve and put their elbow right in my face. And that was about it.
So, Kirsten, you didn't play sports, but you did. It kind of sounds like you did here and there. What about you, Samantha?
Yeah, I actually did a lot of sports. I played tennis, even though it caused me a certain demise recently.
Tennis will come up, but not of the Achilles variety. That's fine.
Yeah, and I did a little bit of track and field. Shout out to West High Wolfpack. I was the only one who did not get a scholarship, actually, to go and run in college, to tell you how that went. But yeah, I was always kind of very athlete-y.
It's actually not the sports I want to mine right now. It's actually this other thing that happened, and I almost hate to admit this, but I'll be honest here. Like when I was like a little kid, whether a child or teenager, or maybe even my stupid 20s, there'd be these like dumb boy conversations. I don't even want to qualify them as like men conversations, but childish conversations participated with little boys that would just belittle women's sports, like belittle it. I'm wondering, do you remember these growing up at any point in your whether childhood or young adulthood, maybe?
I don't really, and that's partially because I didn't grow up in a sporty household. But I did encounter that with my child. My child is a sportsman altogether, has always been Mr. Motion, Mr. Movement, has played all sorts of different kinds of sports, settled into soccer as his sport. But he used to talk smack about women in sports, mostly just to annoy me. He's much better now that he's older, but that was a thing for him. So we always had to talk about that.
That's good, because now we have more ammunition after this episode, I believe, to like kind of mine where that came from. What about you, Samantha? Did you experience that?
A little bit. I feel like throw like a girl was being thrown around a lot, and I didn't get where that came from because,
Pun
like,
intended,
if
yes.
you've ever seen anybody throw a softball, like it was very real, and I could not do that. And so I was like, "What do you mean?"
Right.
Yeah, throw like a girl. And I remember the ones that were like, I could beat a girl with my hand. I could beat that girl with my hands tied behind her back. Or like, and I say this happened not too long ago. It still happens, but like men friends, men like past the threshold of their 20s would say something effective like, oh, I could beat that professional female athlete. I could beat that collegiate female athlete.
Like Serena Williams. Excuse me? Anyway.
Oh man, I hope we get to talk about Serena Williams. I really hope we get to talk about her.
We'll get to that in the latter half, I hope.
Oh, good.
I believe now as a child, I probably believe them to a certain extent. And I'm wondering, like, Kirstin, maybe when you were a kid, I know you didn't play sports, but like hearing what your kid says now, or maybe Samantha, when you were a kid, did you like hear these things and maybe believe them, or did you?
I did not believe them, but it was also just not as much in my, it was not as much in my realm, right? I was an arty kid. I was a reader. I was a kid who was interested in music and band and all that kind of stuff. So it just wasn't in my realm. I did hear it, but I just ignored it because I was like, well, you're just dumb. So that was enough for me. And the same thing with my kid. And the other thing about that is that my child did Taekwondo for a very long time. He was a 2nd degree black belt. And there were girls regularly kicking his ass in TKD. Nice. And so that's all we needed to say was, hey, you know, you've gotten your ass kicked by girls, so don't be talking like that. That was enough.
Talk about a reality check.
Yeah, no, reality checks are useful when you're raising children. Very useful.
Well, reality checks, this is one of them, and we're going to mine that a little bit more. And what I think we'll do, we're going to go back in time 100 years or so, okay? We got 2 world wars, and many U.S. men at that time, talking about the U.S. specifically right now, were going off to fight fascism in Europe. Now, some of those women joined the war effort. Others got into something else. Any guesses from you two what that was?
Oh, baseball in World War II for sure.
Dang, okay.
We got it. We're talking League of Their Own. There's no crying in baseball. Tom Hanks, Gina Davis, Rosie O'Donnell, Madonna even.
Right.
Yeah, the story goes that as the men were off, some of the women who were wanting to play baseball played baseball and dominated, and a league bloomed and blossomed. So if that's happening here in the U.S., and we're going to get back to this baseball trend, but if that's what's happening here, baseball in the States, what do you guys think the sport is that's taking off for, like, say, women in England at this time?
Well, I would assume it's soccer, isn't it?
That's my assumption too.
Samantha?
Or is it tennis?
Those would be my 2 guesses as well, being from Europe.
I don't know.
Well, the answer is, drumroll, Samantha. You're so good at that. I say that legitimately.
No, that was great.
You're right. It's soccer or football.
Right.
So yeah, as the men in the UK are engaging in the wars, women start playing organized soccer. But actually, it started in the mid to late 1800s, right?
Mhm.
By the time of like World War I, there's like 10,000 fans showing up to these women's matches.
Amazing.
Then comes like one particular match in 1920. It's held at a huge stadium in Liverpool. So I said 10,000 for one particular earlier match. How many people do you think showed up to this one match in 1920?
30K.
I would say 45K.
You're both wrong on this one. I'm happy about that because it's going to be a surprise. It's documented that 53,000 spectators showed up for this.
Beautiful.
Awesome. Okay, can I interject here for just a second?
Please.
So my kid, we're Arsenal fans in this house. So we are Prem League people, all right? So last year when my son graduated from college, we went to London and went to the last Arsenal game of the season.
Wow.
And it was a it was the best sports moment of my life to be in that stadium. It was amazing. But the Arsenal women continue to break records. And their record is like, I think I saved it here, 60,160 people. And that was just a week ago that they broke that record. So 60,000 people watching women's sports. So those records just kept going. It may have taken them 1,000 years, 100 years, but still there.
We're going to hold that because that's even more fascinating because what we're about to get to. So we say 53,000 showed up. You said 60,000 were at this match. Well, there's actually a documented number of people that couldn't get through the doors at Everton. I believe it's at Everton in Liverpool. So another guess, maybe another drum roll, Samantha.
But wait, can I also guess though? So if there were 53,000 people that got inside, you're asking how many people were just like outside, just like, damn, I can't get in.
Correct. Basically, yeah.
20K.
That's good.
Okay, again, wrong, but I appreciate that you guessed so highly. This time it was just 10,000 people.
Okay.
So half that, but that's still a lot of additional people that just couldn't get through the gates. I believe they were gates. I don't know what they'd use back then. But so in total, we're saying 63,000 people were in attendance or hope to attend this match. For context, at least for U.S. listeners, which is a lot of them. At this most recent Super Bowl, there was only 62,000 fans that were in attendance. So,
Yeah, and Usher was at the Super Bowl, who is my favorite artist. A lot of people's favorite artist, that's just mine. So that's a big deal.
We could say that people turned up for T Swift, but for soccer, something like that. Does that work? No? Okay. I'm trying to do the music thing, Samantha. I'm trying to do the music.
T Swift is not the way to go, but hey. I digress.
Yeah, I know, but whatever, man. I'm just trying. I'm a country boy. Whatever. You can't take the country out of the Texas boy. I don't know.
Nope, I get that.
So these British female soccer players, though, they're playing soccer, but we want to contextualize. This is not 2020. This isn't the 1990s. These women are holding down full-time factory jobs as well as being soccer stars, right?
That's amazing. So what you're saying is that this was just for leisure. Like it was just for fun?
No, not exactly. Definitely not.
Okay. I mean, feels a little bit like exploitation is coming down the pike.
Well, I would say that it was for, and this is not maybe the right context for the word, but I would say it is for national pride. And I don't mean nationalism. I mean the fact that this is what our country does and we need to keep doing it. And of course, there's exploitation. The Arsenal women who are selling out stadiums everywhere are still paid, I don't know, not even 2/3 of what the Arsenal men are paid. So that's a whole different story. But I would say that those women were playing soccer in part to keep the spirits up of England. That's my guess.
All of this is true. And I actually want to try, I'm going to show you a photo. I'm going to try a screen share. I'm going to show you this one particular team.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yep. I saw this picture.
So can you share with the audience what you're seeing more or less?
Basically, yeah, your typical kind of sports team photo, but they're all wearing cool striped hats and shorts. And yeah, it's all just, maybe 10, 12 women.
What's amazing though is those shorts they're not pants and they're not skirts. They're actual shorts. So those pants would have been scandalous in 1920. Holy moly. I mean, they're the same length as women's shorts now.
I'm glad you're observing these things, especially like you have the shorts, but you have the long sleeves and you have the hats. And I don't have any men's photos right now, but the men's photos aren't wearing hats. And it's interesting. So we're gonna come back to this. I'm gonna stop sharing. And the reason I bring this up is because they were full-time workers, right? And we were talking about, were they doing this for leisure fun? Were they doing it for national pride? Yes and yes, but they were actually also entrepreneurs. Like they were not only damn good at soccer, but they were also beating men's teams at the same time.
Nice.
I hate to qualify it like that, but yes, they were. And that was actually turning a profit. Like that was making money.
But okay, so who was turning a profit? Like who was actually profiting?
Sure, there were probably men involved, and it's not about that per se, but the women were profiting. Like they were the ones who were going out there, setting the games, making the games, helping hawk the tickets, sell the tickets. And so they were profiting off that, off the advertising, and they were finding a way in like the 1920s to not only enter the sport, create the market, but then profit off it, right? They began to earn an income, and not surprising, but surprising maybe. This is kind of like where things get a little dicey with women's soccer, specifically in the UK.
Wonder why that could be. Why don't you let us know, Remoy?
Wonder why.
I have a feeling. A little spidey sense on why that might be. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't. You might be like insinuating like it didn't really go over with the men or the larger institutions that the men governed.
Yep, it's like the 1800s.
Right.
I mean, what are we dealing with now? I can't imagine that it was any better back then.
Okay, so yeah, like in 1921, so just after this match and this growth, the Football Association of England, the FA, or like you may have heard of the FA Cup, outright banned women from playing soccer and having access to club facilities. So think of all the stadiums they were playing in, they lost access. The male teams and other kind of infrastructure that they had at their behest, gone, right? So the larger institutions in their kind of edict deemed women's football as quote unquote unsuitable for females and quote should not be encouraged. And so it's ironic, Kirstin, like about what you saw with Arsenal or the women's Arsenal team is that ban was for 50 years. Like it at that time destroyed women's soccer in the UK.
Thank heavens that's not the case anymore, but think how much farther women's soccer could be had that ban not existed for 50 years. That's the thing. Yeah, there's so many 2 steps forward and 97 steps backwards in women's sports.
Yeah. And I also want to say, like, obviously this language is like very chauvinistic, very like male superiority, but it's also just like factually wrong. You've got women that are having, 53,000 people in the stadium, 10,000 people that are outside like, damn, I couldn't get in, to watch these people is kind of just like, obviously it's suitable for them. It just feels like this is so obviously about controlling women.
Right. And this is not the same, but what comes to mind is Allyson Felix. Do y'all know what happened to Allyson Felix when she got pregnant and Nike was like, nope, we're not going to do that anymore. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, I think you're right. And like, I want to dig in a little bit here, pause over here, because like we can't not think of like America coming from the colonial experiment of the UK and at least having connection to the UK. And so the British here, and we think of like this proper posh culture, right? Like this very almost even demure, refined. It's also like if we think about those same kind of cultural like norms or strictures, like it has these rigidly defined gender roles, at least at that time especially. And I'm wondering like, if you were going to like unpack that into like kind of seeing it through the sports realm, what do you think that'd look like?
I have a bit of a theory on it. I feel like, honestly, I think for me, the simple answer is that it looks like the way that it's turned out, right? It's like these women were making a bunch of money, doing their thing, having people show up, support them, be entertained by, their prowess at soccer, and then men shut it down. So that's for me, that's like a perfect representation of what not just British society would do, but patriarchal society would do. But then I think maybe that would extend to like, controlling the way that women dressed or controlling where they're allowed to play or, having men only spaces or whatever,
Yeah, I spent some time last year when I was in England thinking about why the US is such a mess. How could we not be such a mess when we came from that? Right? Why would we ever think that we would be better than that? Because that's where we came from. And so that colonialism is just baked into us too. And we proceeded to, enact the worst on everybody, and most especially Indigenous people. But yeah, so I would say that conquer and that colonial mentality of I know better is also what was operating here, aside from just, there's a threat, right? I mean, I think that's part of what's underneath Samantha's idea is women threaten men when they get to be too much, when they get to be making too much money or drawing too many people or whatever. That's just threatening, and men can't have that.
There's one thing in specifically, I've done some reading around this, and there's a term that comes up here and there, and I think it's fascinating. Like, and it's what, especially the control thing, the colonial effect, and this idea of like immorality. And like what I want to get at here is like, I'm fascinated by that photo, right? They're wearing long sleeve shirts. They are wearing shorts, but long sleeve shirts and those hats. And it's like this whole idea that is connected that women should maintain this sort of responsibility to not tempt men, right? The whole Adam and Eve and Adam myth, and that women should be this restrained self. So there's this social control between the British state or the culture of that state to control women in this specific way and present themselves, and like women should only present themselves in non-alluring fashion, stay covered up. Like, I wonder if it's the opposite. Like, what if women were like in like super short skirts or shorts running around the pitch and they're just threatened? Oh my God, all these sweaty bodies, like God forbid they're touching men, right? Like they're just going to have giant boners everywhere, I'm sure, right?
Probably.
I think the way women look in sports, there's so much to say about that. And I would say the hat was, I guess to me, the hat was sort of like one of those ways to try to make women look appealing. Right? Because women, even on the playing field, whatever playing field you're on, there's still that obligation to look nice for everybody. And it's just like, no, we're playing sports here and we're going to be sweaty. And that's what sports are. And, it's interesting. There's stuff in my book about that, about like gymnasts who want to be more covered than some, leotards and whatever that are not very, that are way too revealing for some people. And some teams have made the decision to be more covered. And that's great, right? Everybody gets to choose the modesty that they want for their own bodies, right? But that obligation to always look nice, I think, is where those hats are coming from. It's like we still have to remember that they're women. They're not just athletes, they're women playing down there, and women wear hats.
I love that because there's also that, like, I just hate, and I used to be this man, so I'm not like trying to like front like I'm otherwise, but like, if men could just like, especially male quote unquote athletes or those who are like deem themselves athletic, like I used to, if we had the same social pressure to be like as skinny as possible, to not put on weight, to not be too muscular, to be sexy, and then try to also compete at our best, it wouldn't work. Because the math on that doesn't work. So so to even like compare, like when men compare the sports as like 1-to-1 and without understanding like the social confines or pressure of it, it's like absurd. Like it doesn't work. And similarly to like the British culture of this time, like the larger society was kind of like pushing women and girls to play less public sports. Like it was facts. Like that women were supposed to be dressed in head-to-toe garments. Young girls were taught if they were going to play sports, it would be certain sports like tennis. And that's why tennis has had such a long tail and trajectory and a better, and I don't even want to qualify it as better, but like a longer opportunity to evolve in the ways around gender. That initial tennis was actually more casual for women. It was like a true garden game played in the garden behind like fences where the men couldn't see them, where they had to kind of just keep it casual and wear full dresses the whole time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but you still don't see women playing tennis in shorts. They're still wearing tennis skirts.
Yeah.
I mean, this is 2024 and they're still wearing tennis skirts. Women should be able, well, with the exception of like Serena's catsuits occasionally.
Well, she got like shamed for that, didn't she? Like it was so bad.
So much.
Yeah.
So much. And it's like, my goodness, when are women going to get to look like what they want to look like and not put on clothes to serve others versus serving themselves, and what is most comfortable to play in and what is most beneficial to play in, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's a lot to be said about all of that.
It just speaks to this, like, I was just going to say, it just speaks to this, like, larger understanding of, men just being completely unable to, like, self-control. So they have to go and control everybody else into some sort of, garden tennis, right? Like, into, like, no, you can't earn money for your own soccer game that you put on, that you played, that you did everything to. It's like, no, you have to stop all of that because we think we can't handle it. It's like, among all of these fans, I am 100% sure that there are a lot of people who went and watched the women without sexualizing them. Like, I'm sure they were just like, let's just go, including probably a lot of men, but people in power have to have that control. And so...
Right. Well, and I appreciate you bringing up control, Samantha, because then and sexualizing people, because that, of course, again, is the argument against having LGBTQ people in locker rooms, right? Oh, they won't be able to control themselves. Women have been controlling themselves in locker rooms forever. For frickin' ever. And the fact that men can't do that, that's a whole other threat and situation. And there's just so much to think about in terms of control and who can control themselves and who can't. And it's very, 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 very rarely women that can't control themselves. Women are not, I'm just going to be done with that. Sorry. I'll just stop there.
No, I love it. Thank you. Well, I love the fact that you brought up, again, like that immorality kind of thing that we were touching on. I want to touch on another one, like similar to that. And it's the idea, and it's going to marry some of these ideas that we've already just kind of been percolating on. It's this diehard idea that women were just, quote unquote, inferior to men, right? So this inferiority bullshit. And that's going to bring us back to baseball. Okay. So we're back in history. It's back around the same time of the 1920s in the US. And this is at the same time women's baseball is now growing. Now, ironically or not, another sports institution is forming at this same time. Any guesses on what this might be?
NFL.
Good guess. Okay.
Softball.
Good. Both good guesses. Both incorrect guesses, but good guesses. It's actually Little League Baseball, okay? So this is happening right in the middle of around the Great Wars of the 1920s. And from jump, it's clear this organization has an agenda. In fact, the term boy was explicitly written into the organization's constitution, right?
Yeah, that's kind of like the perfect way to groom boys, right? It's kind of giving very Boy Scout vibes.
No, that's actually very true. That's for Little League specifically. It had that kind of model of like raising boys and to be the American ideal, right? And it's actually very successful. The league like grows hand over fist over the years. By 1953, it's televised nationally on CBS. So that's the World Series, the Little League World Series. In 1957, the first non-U.S. team from Mexico won the World Series. So it's growing globally. Then in 1964, Little League was granted a federal charter as a nonprofit via Congress, and part of it read, again explicitly, assist boys in developing qualities of citizenship, sportsmanship, and manhood.
Yeah, but like I really can't imagine that there weren't girls playing somewhere. Like we're always getting this stuff.
Yeah, especially if there's women playing, like there's going to be girls playing, and there totally were. Within the larger infrastructure and teams and Little League, like subsequent leagues within the larger league, there were definitely girls playing, and some teams let it slide. In others, girls had to kind of like disguise themselves as boys just to get on the field, like this whole passing thing.
Yeah, I'm sure the boys love that. I'm sure they play well with the boys.
Well, actually, this is what's interesting. Like, I have some clips here. Let me see. I'm going to play you some audio. This is from some boys around the time that in the 1970s talking about playing with girls.
I think everybody should play as long as they're in the age. Yeah, like if they're good enough. I don't mind anybody playing with me as long as they, don't wreck it. Well, if she's good enough, I think she can play, but if not, they shouldn't let them play. I don't care as long as they can play good.
What do you think of Janine? She was hitting a couple
She's
of...
good.
She's good.
They might get up and belt you.
Some girls can play just as good as boys and better. They get turned down because they're a girl.
Do you wish you were a boy?
No.
That makes me reminds me that I don't want to be a boy either. No, thank you. I think that just speaks to the fact that sexism is learned versus sexism is innate. And we are just so inundated with sexist behavior and sexist laws and sexist whatever that, of course, our children are going to learn it through osmosis, through just existing in our culture. But if it is countered at home, or if it is not reinforced at home in any way, then that's not going to be there. That's going to be where kids are going to say, yeah, the people who are good can play.
Yeah. That socialization or that like whether it's through the larger institutions or through the like soft power of sports or general culture, like that's where this is so fascinating, right? Because the boys didn't, or not, I can't say for all the boys, but some of the boys just didn't care. They just want to play baseball with the best kids that played baseball, right? Mm-hmm. But when it came to the men at Little League, primarily the men, when they caught on, they actually made it official by, as you probably guessed, instituting an all boys policy.
So, and this is, well, I have a question for you, but this is how, like this small group of men made decisions for these boys that were like, it's cool. Susie can play with me if she wants. Like, they're good. I like playing with them just fine. And it's just like the small group of men that's making all these decisions, institutionalizing sexism. And then all of a sudden we're like, no, boys are stronger than girls and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, it's because these 5 dudes here decided that the boys and the girls shouldn't play together, you know? And so where does that leave the girls who were playing?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I do want to point out, like, you know, there was a larger culture within a lot of the parents, fathers and quote unquote mothers in a binary like language were on the side of this. And this is like working class New Jersey. I'm not trying to like soften it by any means, but there was parents that were on both sides of this. And there was parents who were aligning with this as should be a boys only sport, right? Whether the chicken or the egg, I don't want to remove the fact that there were other people involved in this as we think about this, right? But yeah, back to those girls that were in those lineups. It's unfortunate because a lot of them were warned, whether the families or them themselves or the teams that they were playing on, that the larger institution would not allow them to play in the league anymore. So the whole team would have to forfeit. If there was one girl on a team, the whole team would have to forfeit their like individual charters. So kind of like the story of the women in the UK, the girls could play baseball all they wanted, but they just couldn't play in the infrastructure of Little League. Mm-hmm. They couldn't play with their friends. And yeah, Kirstin, like as a parent, just keep coming back to that. What would you do if this was kind of like happening around your kids?
I would have been the person who is writing letters and speaking in front of meetings and saying, this is absurd, absolutely absurd. And how are we benefiting? Because my question would always be, how are we benefiting our children? How are we benefiting boys by shutting them away from girls who can play as well as they can, or maybe better? How are we benefiting girls? What is the message that we are sending to girls by sequestering them off into whatever inferior place we are offering them? That is the question.
Well, there was actually, this is like right around after the Civil Rights Movement. So there was a big push for this. Like there's one particular story that caught the ears of the National Organization of Women, or NOW for short, along with the ACLU. And they helped take one girl's case and their family's case to civil rights court. And this was happening in New Jersey, and it caused like huge, like I was kind of talking about, brouhaha between parents and the officials and things of this nature. And one more time, I want to play you some news clips of what some of the parents were saying.
Won't make it so. I don't want my 10-year-old girl sliding into second base and having your 12-year-old boy tagging her on the breast. I don't want my 10-year-old girl rounding third base or second base and having your 12-year-old boy tagging her on the rump.
What are you guys hearing there? What does that bring to mind?
Anger.
But it's like that same thing of inferiority and like kind of sexual control. Like the girls need to control the boys. Like we can't control the boys. We can't.
Right.
The girls have this responsibility. They're also inferior.
Because for me, it sounds like projection too. It's like, why do you assume that my son is the kind of kid who's going to be, feeling up on girls while he's playing baseball. Like
while he's playing baseball. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a question. And that, I guess it's just, I mean, and granted that was a dad talking, but we always have to think about how we have internalized whatever ism or phobia we're talking about. Right. And that man is able to reinforce sexism, but he's also got his own internalized sexism and probably his own hangups about, bodies and what body parts do whatever and all that kind of stuff. So that really is, like Samantha said, that's just projection. And that's just gross.
Yeah. And like what you talked about, like the projection and his kind of this father's idea of like bodies and science and body parts is fascinating, right? Because at the civil rights case, Little League Baseball brings experts onto the stand that say, like, girls have weaker bones than boys, and their girls' hand-eye coordination is less than boys, so they'll be more likely for injury, and like all this kind of like quote unquote expert knowledge to the stand.
Is that true though? Like, I feel like that's not true.
Well, that's exactly right. Like the ACLU, NOW are now, they brought a variety of other physicians and scientists who said absolutely otherwise. They documented how there were no differences between girls and boys, especially prepubescent boys and girls. And in fact, some measurements showed girls had like quicker hand-eye coordination than boys. I actually spoke with one of these medical experts. I can't remember her name. She's awesome. She's like in her 90s. And she was just like on the phone. She was just like, no, that was just pseudoscience. It was non-factual BS. They were just doing whatever they could to promote this dichotomy. And it was absurd. Like it was laughable. But at any cost, they were trying to uphold this.
I think science is the thing that saves us eventually, because if you get the right scientists who are doing studies that are unbiased in terms of how many different kinds of bodies and how many different kinds of humans we are doing these studies on, that's the place where science will show us that we are not unequal, right? That is the place where, if we go back to the LGBTQ community for just a second, that's the place where science says, oh yeah, homosexuality is everywhere. Here's 60 genders in this scientific thing. And yeah, so let's listen to that science as opposed to listening to the pseudoscience and the science of people who are not paying attention. Like, so I was reading before we got started about Leah Thomas. Do y'all know who Leah Thomas is? Leah Thomas is? Leah Thomas is the first openly trans athlete to win an NCAA Division I national championship. She won the women's 500-yard freestyle event in 2022. Now, to do this as a trans woman is giant because of the fact that hormone replacement is going to take away your muscles, right? So she had to build up all the muscles that she had, plus more, to be able to do that. And that's the thing that people don't take into consideration. It's like, you got to know the science of what is going on. You can't just make these general, broad statements about, oh, well, trans women, blah, blah, blah. No. Let's talk about the actual stuff that's going on. Let's talk about the science of what it means that Leah Thomas had to be like 3 times as strong as she was when she was a man. So, or was presenting as a man. She was never a man. Sorry. Let me say that clearly. That's where science saves us. But we don't get that science very often.
Well, yeah, it's like we have to consider like who are the institutions that are controlling like
Correct.
the messaging of the science and or pushing quote unquote science, right? And like, so what's great about this particular story, at least in this particular moment, is Little League lost. And inevitably, they had to let girls play. So it's been 50 years, more or less, a little bit more actually, after a groundbreaking case, this groundbreaking case won. I'm just wondering for you two, how many girls do you think play Little League Baseball now? 50 years. At least we've seen in like 50 years for women's soccer, it's gotten back to like square one.
Right. I don't think girls play baseball as much as they play softball because that's what they're trained to think they should play.
Yeah, I'll say I would like for it to be like 50% or 60% or 55%, but I feel like there's also like a lot of like internalized messages around there. So I'm going to say like 25, 30%.
Yeah, it's much less than that. And Kirstin, you're not wrong. Right now, it's as of the numbers I saw recently for this last season, it was 1 out of 7 Little League Baseball players are girls. So that's, I don't know what number that is, 10, it's not 10, but
14%.
There you go.
Thanks, Samantha. So that's, that's a dark disparity. And the reason is it's because you're right, Kirstin, it's because of softball, but not in the ways that you would think. Again, let's focus on this. This is fascinating and disgusting at the same time. Right after that verdict, Little League created their softball league and started pushing a huge message that softball is for girls and marketed correctly to those parents, those same parents, that this ideology that softball was the safer sport for their sweet little girls.
Oh, safer.
Is softball literally called softball because it's like a girl's sport?
There's
I need to look into that.
There's different discussions around that, around the origins of that. But what is interesting is I spoke to a Little League representative just last year for a story I did for the Not Past It podcast. And I asked her, I was like, yo, let's be honest here. Tell me, did they do this because to keep girls out? And she was like, she couldn't say it on her own authority or just had to hedge, but she said she could believe that, yes, the heads of Little League Baseball at that time created their softball league to keep girls out and maintain it as a sport only for boys. Can we just sit with that for a second? Just 50 years ago, we almost had a national sport for children that was fully integrated along gender lines. There would be no exclusion of trans or gender nonconforming. Any freaking child could play. If you wanted to play baseball, if you were good enough, you wanted to compete, if you were excited, if you wanted to have fun, you could have played, and there were no gender appropriations of who girls baseball or boys baseball. You could have just played.
Imagine the world we would live in now.
Right.
Like, it just would be a completely different world.
Yeah. Yeah, it really would be. And we would have made giant dents in sexism if that would have been the case, because we wouldn't have been teaching our children that boys and girls need to be separated for sports. Because there's very rarely any opportunity for that to ever change.
Yeah. And I just think about like baseball as America's pastime or whatever, and just the impact of baseball on our culture in general. Like even people who don't like baseball still watch baseball, they go to the game and all of that. Having that be integrated would have had such a huge impact throughout our society sociologically.
Right, exactly. Good thing that happened around the same time as Title IX. So we should have guessed that Title IX really wasn't going to fly if that stuff was still happening, right?
Well, this comes to the end of our two stories, but I do want to pick this up a little bit more in our next segment with Kirstin.
Remoy, don't forget me, though, still here.
Yeah, I know. We have 5 questions, or I have 5 questions, only 5 questions for Kirstin. And Samantha, you'll keep me reined in, I guess. All that and more just after this break.
Calling all bookworms and changemakers, get ready to dive into Book Club. That's BOOK, Beyond Our Own Knowledge, for those that don't know. Explore a world of captivating reads that explore diversity, foster empathy, and spark personal and professional growth. Join a vibrant community of readers with over 650 male leaders to date. Engage in thought-provoking discussions and expand your horizons. It's not just a book club, it's a journey towards a more inclusive future. Visit bookclubformen.com today and start your reading adventure with purpose. Book Club, where pages turn to progress and readership to leadership. Join the club and let's read for change.
Welcome back. Samantha, you're still here, huh?
You know it. I am.
Well, okay. Well, can you give us a rundown? Can you give me and Kirstin and our audience a reminder of what's happening in this new segment of ours?
I'd love to. So we have this IG Live follow-up show called Beneath the Mask.
Yes, I've heard of such things.
Heard, but has never appeared on it. But I digress. So we have this IG Live show where we ask our former guests about just various questions to kind of get beneath the mask, if you will. So to mirror that, the second half is kind of like the first 5 questions for our guests.
So it's like 2 halves of the same sporting event, two halves of the same coin.
It's endearing that your literati mind always goes to metaphors. But after the 5 questions, our guests get to ask the producer, not the host, a question. And you guessed it.
Yes. Yes, Kirstin. In this instance, you get to ask Samantha why she loves me so much.
Flipped it.
Okay.
Or, a question more specific to this episode or podcast. Does that sound okay?
I've got one.
Okay, so Remoy, take it away.
I just want you to know I have roughly 7 to 8 questions written down right now.
That's actually, you only get 5. You told me 5, you get 5, friend. Egalitarianism, equality.
7 or 8. I mean, I guess the last episode that we did this, you only got 5. You got like 12 off.
I did. I love a sub question. I'm not gonna lie.
But I'll find a way to compress this, or we'll feel it out. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to combine 2 right here. And I think we'll make it a little bit more of a discussion so it doesn't feel like I'm cutting it off. But let's do this. Kirstin, whether it's from the books that you've written or kind of like you've already started, things that you're seeing in sports and gender right now, what are 3 of the most interesting, exciting things that you'd want to spotlight?
I would love to spotlight 3 things that are sort of diverse, I guess, in their impact and what they are, but they're still pretty cool. The one thing I would say about women in sports is that the progress is slow and steady, right? But it is steady. It's very slow, still steady. So the Professional Women's Hockey Association, which is brand new, right? They are selling out venues all over the place. We have a team here in Minnesota. We are the state of hockey. They're selling out venues all the time. And so that's pretty wonderful. The second thing that I would like to highlight is in Minneapolis, a sports bar just opened called A Bar of Their Own, and they will only show women's sports. And the woman...
There's one in Oregon and one here. I think they one here called the Sports Bra, and it's exciting.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, right. And so the thing that I want to mention about that is that one of the women who started the bar said, you don't even know how many streaming services we have to get all of these sports. And that is constantly, pervasively, and perpetually the problem with women's sports. There's that vicious cycle of advertising. If we don't advertise them, people don't know about them. If they are on some, remote The Ocho, nobody's going to watch them if we can't have The Ocho on our streaming service. So there's this real still ability to hide women's sports. People have that power to do that. But the bar is there, and the bar is not doing that.
I love this because, if we're not attuned to it, we may not see it or whatever. But there's so much less money and institutional infrastructure for women's sports, so that's a challenge.
Much.
The kind of establishments would be the networks, the proprietors of control would be but women's sports doesn't create an audience. There's an audience for that. Well, if we just look back a century like we just did, there's an audience for it. There's an audience
That's right. The audience would be there. And I would also like to say that part of that is also proven by the U.S. women's national team, the soccer team, who has 4 stars, I would like to say. The men have 0 stars. Those stars, those women playing soccer, those were the jerseys that were selling. It wasn't the men's national team jerseys that were selling. It was the women. It will always remain the women.
Yes, women's sports is actually dominating right now, and there's so many market opportunities. So now people are starting to invest, and it's a lot of women driving the conversation and pushing that in former athletes, which I think is interesting. But there's still an infrastructural thing that's still lacking support, which is fascinating. I was facilitating this interview with Michelle Wee West. She's a former pro golfer. And she was like, this is such bullshit because men's golf, even the amount of cameras that are there for a televised event are exponentially large to a women's event. So what you're seeing on TV is just a lesser product. The quality of the product is lesser. So it's less tantalizing for the viewer, less dynamic or as interesting. So infrastructurally, you're not getting as a quality of a product because we're not supported the same. Now, if we were supported the same, what would you see on screen and what would young girls be more interested in playing?
That's right.
Fascinating.
That's right. And that goes as far as the NCAA does not call the women's tournament March Madness. Absolutely does not. Cannot, because March Madness only applies to the men's basketball tournament. If we called the women March Madness, that would be a whole new piece of infrastructure that would, again, support women's sports, support young women watching. right? So that's another example. But my third thing that I would like to highlight is something that happened in my home state of Nebraska on August 31st of this year. So we used to be a big football state, right? The University of Nebraska Cornhuskers, grew up with them. Now, however, we are a volleyball state. And so they sold out Memorial Stadium for a women's volleyball match. 92,003 people came to watch a women's volleyball match. And that's astounding. And so I really appreciate the fact that despite the fact that all of us are pissed about Nebraska football falling apart and has been falling apart for 20 years, and we keep thinking it's going to get better, and it doesn't, at least we are now embracing women's volleyball as a sport everybody can rally around and say, oh yeah, the Huskers are still good at some sport. Personally, I think we should just say, hey, we're a volleyball school now, but that is not happening.
I know I'm not allowed to ask a question, but I have a question. Just a little one. So do you think that that's also related to the fact that there are a lot more women sportscasters? Because I feel like the two are related. There's like a general effort to bring women into sports, to have them be champions in sports, you know, whether it's on or off the field. So in general,
I think that's very true. And I think that, like, as an example of that, when you watch a U.S. women's national team, soccer team broadcast, those are women broadcasters doing that broadcast. All of the major football, NFL, you know, whatever on each channel, all of them now have women who are both at the desk and on the field. And I saw a set of men congratulating this woman because she was going off on maternity leave. And I was like, I have never seen that in my entire life, that there's a whole desk of men saying, oh, good luck with your baby. That was sort of like revolutionary to me. Even though it may not have been, it really felt like a big deal. So I do think you're right, Samantha, in the fact that when we see more women associated with all sorts of kinds of sports, it makes things easier. And it makes it maybe more acceptable for the sexist dude in his basement guzzling beer. Maybe some little tiny thing gets tripped in his brain that it's like, oh, women do know about football. Oh, women do know about golf. Oh, women do know about basketball. So hopefully that presence always matters, right? Representation matters. That's a true thing. So I hope that that continues.
Thank you, Remoy, for letting me slide.
You happy with yourself, Samantha?
Oh, I was like, I'm sorry. I had to. Thank you. Appreciate you. It's a birthday question.
There you go.
It was Samantha's birthday the other day. That's fine. I guess that's fine. That flies. Yeah, Kirstin, like, how does this, thinking about what we covered earlier, especially like what we just kind of discovered about like Little League. I know you do some, there's some advocacy in your life around trans and gender non-conforming kind of experiences. What does that kind of bring to mind for sports and how you're thinking about that now?
Trans discrimination just literally does not compute for me. I do not understand why people get so bent out of freaking shape about trans people. I just don't get it. People are who they say they are, and biology is complex, and it's not my business to say who you are. It is also not my business to limit what sports you play. I know that people worry a lot, especially about trans women and unfair advantages, but I think Leah Thomas, that swimmer that I spoke about, if people would like pay attention, they would understand how hormone replacement changes trans women's muscles once they start, working with hormone replacement. I think a lot of sports entities need to get caught up with the science, right? The NCAA is moderately okay, but the International Swimming Organization banned Leah Thomas from competing in Olympic trials because she had had too much puberty, they said. And so there was the potential for, extra strength or whatever. But for me, it's the issue of, I don't understand what your problem is. I think for gender nonconforming athletes and people who consider themselves non-binary, that's a world that we're going to have to really think about in terms of how sports is going to be going forward. The binary of sports as a whole is really something that we need to keep considering, right? And where are the places where we don't have to have that binary? 2 high school women just won their matches against men in high school wrestling. I think one of them was here in Minnesota and one of them was in Nebraska. And they were the first women to do that in boys wrestling, right? To win at state levels against boys. That's a giant thing. How can we keep going with that kind of stuff so that it's safer and better for everybody, no matter what your gender identity is?
I get it. I so get it. Believe me, I get it. But we just had an episode that came out yesterday with this young person named Jeremy Hurt, this young man. Similarly with another person, Nalo Zidane, a few months ago. And it's something I think about in sports, but they brought it up when it comes to music or culture at large. And it's just like such a fascinating thing. Again, talking about control and like the socialized kind of confines of America. And then if we bring it to sports, it's like, yo, where's our imagination in the sense that like, why do we think we have these rules around sports that we do? They're arbitrary. So like if we change the game, if we had an imagination about what, quote unquote, like basketball is my sport, right? So if we could rethink basketball, it supports men the way the basketball is constructed now to be more dominant over women. What if the game was just different? What if the goal was 15 feet tall and you couldn't dunk? Or what if, as we see now, and I know it's a controversial thing, but Caitlin Clark, who can shoot lights out, if farther out was reported with exponentially more points. So if you shot from farther out, you got way more points. So if there was a 5-point shot and girls and boys could hit that equally. So even just like switching like what we're thinking about, what our imagination around sports are, like what if we opened up, what if sports were more open to the sense that they weren't so strictly like rigorous around gender and then beneficial to one gender and how they are now versus another. But like you could have like fully integrated sports where there are boys and girls team benefiting both athletes of different stature, of different sizes, of different builds, and rewarding them in ways that were like, especially team sports that were so team oriented. That's exciting to me.
It is exciting. I don't know if it's possible, but it is exciting.
At least right now, but we should have like this, we should be able to like open up our imagination and think like the confines and the rules of the sports that we have are arbitrary.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Arbitrary.
Well, and the question is,
they make millionaires and billionaires out of a lot of people right now, but they are arbitrary.
What are sports for? What is the point of professional sports? That's the question we need to sit down and talk about. Is sports entertainment? Is sports gladiatorship, like Roman gladiatorship? What is sports to us? And we need to have that conversation probably before we can have the gender conversation and talk about equity and gender parity and, non-gendered teams, just people playing a sport, right?
It's absurdly fraught, and I wish it wasn't. But unfortunately, that's the lives we live, and we have to hold both at the same time or multiple truths at the same time,
yes,
right?
We do.
Where am I in the question, Samantha?
I think it's like 4 with 1 sub question. So I'll just say 4. So you have a couple more. You announced 7.
I'll have one more. We'll do one more. And again, I'm going to marry 2 things-ish together, I think. Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, you're a parent. You've written about sports. You write about fiction, and we're seeing like how like the socialization of these ideas for kids, both in like reading and sports, can have a huge effect. I don't know if it's like, what do you tell kids, but maybe it's like, what do you tell other parents now, knowing what you know and thinking about reading and sports and how they're thinking about their own kids or about the future of our culture?
I'm going to answer that question as a literature teacher rather than a writer. And I'm going to say that as a literature teacher, the goal is to find books that your kids are interested in. Doesn't matter what kind of books it is, fiction, nonfiction, graphic novels, whatever. Find the books that your kid wants to read. As a writer, I would say, think about what you want to represent in books. What kind of kids do you want to see in books? Representation matters. Representation matters all the time. So, what kind of kids are you seeing in those books? Where can you add kids in your own books, right, if you are writing? And where can you recruit writers from those communities? Because you don't want to see, indigenous there's just as an example, you don't want to see Indigenous non-binary kids written by a white lady. No, you want to see Indigenous non-binary kids written by Indigenous writers, even if they're not non-binary, because there's all sorts of nuance that goes with cultures and representation. So that's the other piece of that, is you want to just encourage parents to be involved in what their kids are reading. You want to encourage them to encourage writers, and you want to just encourage kids to notice what's going on. So I'm going to step back just a moment, but I was somebody who was raised by Sesame Street. I know that people start talking now, and I've said this for a long time, but Sesame Street is one of the things that's helped me be as focused on equity as I can be, because I was raised I was never told that the people on Sesame Street were different, even though they are different, and we have to celebrate differences and understand where differences matter, right? We have to understand how differences can cause things to happen. My son had to have a lesson in why his friend Issa was going to get in more trouble with the police than he was, and he needed to stick up and be there for Issa if something was going on, right? That happens, but we also have to go back and say, we just have to show kids that people are people. We have to do both of those things at the same time. Same thing in books. Let your kids see lots of different people in books so that they understand that there's lots of different people in the world. And I was really grateful for Sesame Street for that lesson.
Thank you for the work you do also. I'm like,
you
can
are
I
welcome.
send my kids? Can I come to your class, please?
Yes, no, you can. And there is always worry about this work, right? Especially there's just worry about it, but yeah, it's important and we got to do it. And if I don't do it, who's going to do it? So somebody got to do it.
Somebody's got to do it.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, Kirstin, to keep it all things sports, it's, your turn to swing that bat. Anything you want to ask Samantha? Samantha has to answer.
I want to ask Samantha to tell me about Serena Williams and how Serena Williams, because we said we were going to talk about Serena. So let's talk about how Serena Williams fits into your life, if she does.
Wow, what a great question. So even though I got my ass whipped at tennis recently, in high school, I used to play tennis. And, I used to walk
really
around.
Know that.
Yeah. I used to play tennis in high school, which is why I thought I could play as an adult. Surprise, I can't. So I used to have a racket in my little backpack as I was walking around like a little nerd. And people used to call me Serena, actually, because I was the one black girl. Yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing. I was the one black girl on the tennis team, and I wasn't half bad. And so, and Serena's literally the best athlete of all time. So one thing that I want to say about her and also about Andy Murray is that he called out a reporter once for saying that, for basically he was talking about how he's the most decorated tennis player, whatever, at the height of his game. And he was the most decorated male player, right? Because obviously you have Serena. And I know that Andy Murray said it, but it just speaks so much of her, about her just prowess and her excellence as an athlete, that no matter what conversation she's in, no matter what sport we're talking about, even, it's Serena's always in that list. So shout out to her.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I just really admire her. And she is the epitome of intersectionality in sports, right? Because there are things she can't be emotional on the court, but all these other men can be emotional on the court, right? There's all sorts of things that happen with Serena that are very specific to Serena because she's a Black woman in America on the court being the best athlete ever. And same with Simone Biles, right? Similar anyway. So yeah, I just admire Serena Williams so dang much. She is above and beyond as an athlete. She's so amazing.
Kirstin's doing my job for me. Thank you. That's great.
Thank you for asking. And this was such a nice, awesome conversation. And want to know if there's where the people can find you, if there's anything that you want to plug.
Yeah, you can find me at KirstinCronn-Mills.com. There's a hyphen between Cronn and Mills. My sports books are there. You can find them actually at Learner. That's a educational publisher. There are 2 different sports books that I have. My fiction, you can find information about that on my website. But yeah, it's just a lot of fun to talk as an author since I spend all my time usually talking as a teacher. So this has been a great time. So thank you both very much.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. So,
What is it, Remoy?
well, is it safe to assume after our convo today with Kirstin that, there'll be more books added to your reading list?
Not for nothing, but yeah. Yep. Yep.
Well, Samantha will be, and I'm sure everybody here will be too. You can check out her books titled Gender Inequality in Sports and LGBTQ plus athletes claim the field. Also, actually, another great title is Playing with the Boys by Eileen McDonough and Laura Papano. That made up a lot of the research in this episode.
Yep, and we'll be sure to share all of those titles on our website, masculinitypod.com, as well as our socials.
Actually, yeah, for sure. You can actually check out next week our Instagram live show, Beneath the Mask, where Kirstin will visit Samantha to talk all things Remoy and I guess some sports too,
Let me tell you who will not be in attendance. Remoy, but I digress. But really, though, you can find us on the socials where we're growing all of these conversations throughout our community.
Yeah, actually, and also you can help us out in building that community by giving us 5 stars. 5 stars, 5 stars.
Yes, please. Whatever app you call your podcast home, be sure to leave us a review. That will really help to get the conversation into more ears.
Well, until next time, I'm your boy George Phillip, the first.
And I'm Samantha Zessie. Thank you so much for listening.
Peace.
Ciao. Wait, you're 40? I thought we were both in the 39 together. Oh, snap. But hey,